Now, we are going to talk about what is happening in Alang, Gujarat, India. And first I want to apologize because I know I'm pronouncing that wrong. I am sorry. Please just bear with me throughout the presentation. Alright, the purpose of this presentation is to discuss the shipbreaking industry happening in Alang. We're going to understand how the shipbreaking industry impacts the environment via air pollution. And then we're going to understand how the shipbreaking industry impacts the health of the workers here in India. Throughout this presentation, we have 6 different figures we're going to go over. The first one is spatial data. It's going to talk about exactly the area directly being affected. Then we have 2 line graphs. We're going to talk about the number of ships being broken down and the weight of materials they're getting from the ships. Then in a pie chart, we're going to talk about the components extracted, basically what exactly is coming out of these ships, what materials. Then we're going to have a bar chart of talking about the air pollutants in the area from the industry. And lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about iron toxicity, and you will understand why when we get there. All right, so here in the left corner, we have a map of India. On the west coast, you see the area of Gujarat. And then in the south, you can see the little bay area. It's the Gulf of Cambay. Along that, you have the city, the small village of Alang. And now what is happening there, different countries throughout the world, including the UK, the US, Germany, they're sending old ships to Alang to get broken down when they are no longer usable. So after a ship's been commissioned for about 20 years, it starts to be more cost effective to just discard it than to continue the upkeep of the ship. So these well-developed high-income nations sell their old ships to Alang for Alang to dispose of them, to break them down and get rid of them. Now, we have 2 line charts talking about how many ships are being broken down per year and the light displacement tonnage, basically how much weight they're pulling from these ships. This data starts in 1985, but we do know this shipbreaking industry, this ship graveyard, began in the 70s. So you can see in the second line graph, figure 3, there was a huge peak in the weight of materials around 2000, and then it's steadily decreasing over the years, despite what we see in figure 2, with the number of ships continually increasing over time. This chart here looks at what is being taken out of the ship, the different components of the ship. A large portion of it is re-rollable ferrous scrap and iron pellets. That's going to be about 75 to 80% of the weight of the ship. It's all this scrap metal. And then 25% is reconditioned machinery, so things that they can repurpose and reuse. This chart here looks at the different air pollutants that goes into the air as they're breaking down these ships. This study looks at Alang multiple times throughout the course of a year and then kind of averaged it together. It had a control city of Gathneth, which is roughly 40 kilometers away. It's still along the coast. It's in the Gulf of Cambay, not too far away, but we can see that the air is considerably cleaner and healthier there because they do not have constant ship breaking down. The largest air pollutant element that we have is iron, and that obviously comes from the rusting metals constantly being broken down. Large rusty ships broken down releases lots and lots of iron into the air, and that can be a real issue for the body. We often can see iron toxicity in higher income nations where people eat a lot of red meat. But obviously we can also see it in these low income areas where a lot of manual labor is happening around iron rust elements. Iron toxicity throughout the body ultimately is usually fatal. It starts pretty quickly, roughly 6 hours after an overdose. So a huge portion of iron being inhaled. You're going to start out with some gastrointestinal issues, vomiting, diarrhea, and then it just progressively gets worse as time goes on. It leads to a lot of necrosis and acidosis, shock in the body. And then ultimately, the fourth stage usually ends up in some sort of intestinal cancer, lots of ulcers inside the body, which oftentimes is fatal, which is really sad. So, a quick summary of everything we have discussed. The shipbreaking industry in Alang, it's the largest ship graveyard in the world. Workers break down these huge ships piece by piece with their hands. Very low wages, usually $1 or $2 a day, and they're working 12-hour days. They're also most of the time staying in like campsites near Alang, so they're not even going home and getting away from the area at night. As they're breaking down these ships all throughout the day, pollutants are being released into the air, as well as into the water, because remember, it's on the Gulf, but it's being released into the air constantly, and they're constantly inhaling these chemicals, these pollutants, lots of iron and other elements. And that ultimately has a detrimental effect on their long-term health. It's not good, of course, to inhale a lot of iron or other elements that can be toxic. All right, so here are the references we used for different articles for data, and then all of the pictures came from one website. So thank you so much for listening.